Greetings and welcome back. Today in this video we are continuing with Domain 1, which is Security and Risk Management, and the topic of this video is Evaluating and Applying Security Governance Principles. There are several items that are covered in this video. These include alignment of security function, organizational processes, organizational roles and responsibilities, security control frameworks, due care, and due diligence. So what do these topics mean? Let's take a look at this. Here's an overview of security and risk management, the first domain of CISSP. We talked about it in the previous video. So for here, I'm just going to skip the slide. And here's a learning map. So it's domain 1, which we covered in the previous videos, includes these topics, and in this video we're covering the second topic of security governance principles. So let's get some of the definitional items out of the way. It's kind of important to get the exact definition from the body of knowledge so that we are aware of what they expect us to know. Security governance is the collection of practices related to supporting, defining, and directing the security efforts of an organization. Security governance principles are often closely related and often intertwined with the corporate IT governance. Some aspects of governance are imposed on an organization because of the laws and regulations of a country, and some are required by industry. So a government type of regulation example might be GDPR, privacy rule in Europe, regulation in Europe, as well as PCI DSS, which is the standard for the finance industry within the US. So you get two examples here of the different types of standards. Governance is a complex task, and it varies from time to time, from industry to industry, and from country to country. And the regulations cause the requirements to evolve. So it's a dynamic living entity that we have to work towards to maintain what we call the security hygiene of a information contained in a system. Security governance is the implementation of security solution and a management method that are tightly interconnected. Security governance directly oversees and gets involved in all levels of security. And the security governance effort is commonly managed by a governance committee or at least a board of directors, because we want to make sure that there's highly influential stakeholders of the organizations are managing the security operations of an organization. Security governance is complex and requires a group of experts to work together. There are several security frameworks that exist. Some of the examples on this slide are the NIST 800-53. You can Google it or search it on a search engine of your choice and get more information. Organization adopts security frameworks in an effort to standardize and organize what is often a complex undertaking, that is, implementing reasonable security governance. One of the essential element of IT principles, and applies similarly to the information security, is the alignment to the needs of an organization. So an organization may have strategy and then goals underneath the strategy, mission, and the objectives. The security function must align closely through all of these elements to the needs of the organization. Security management planning ensures proper creation, implementation, and information of a security policy. Security management planning aligns the security functions to the strategy, goals, missions, and objectives of the organization. So let's talk about the alignment further of security function to business strategy, goals, missions, and objectives. So oftentimes we have this top-down analysis that is needed in an organization. So you got to have a business case, and the definition of a business case from the body of knowledge is a business case is usually a documented argument or stated position in order to define a need to make a decision or take form of action. Business case will demonstrate a business-specific need to alter an existing process or choose an approach to a business task. A business case is often made to justify the starting of a new project. This is a principle of IT because it involves people, processes, and technology that we must, align whatever IT is doing to the needs of the organization. Then you have budget restrictions. Every organization has limited amount of budget and resources available. So what budget can be allocated to the business needs of the organization as far as the information security is concerned? Security can be expensive, but it is often less costly than the absence of that security. So if you don't have security, the loss and the damage that the organization will experience will be far greater in most cases than the investment you make in achieving information security. Then there's scarcity of resources. Organizations have so many resources. There's not unlimited, number of resources of money, people, technology, and space. So we have to align, and prioritize those resources to meet the needs of the government. So the maximum benefit needs to be obtained from any undertaking to the organization. That again is a alignment principle. And an effective way to address security management is a top-down approach. A senior management initiate and define policies to provide directions for all levels of the organization. And this is very important because the senior management members have the influence and the authority to make these kinds of requirement or initiations towards the organization. Middle management expands the security policy into standards, business baselines, guidelines, and procedures. The operational managers or security professionals implement the configurations prescribed in the security management documentation. Finally, the end users comply with the security policy of the organization. And this is an important point, I want to emphasize again. So senior management defines policies, middle management expands the policies into standards, baselines, and guidelines. Operational managers and security professionals implement the configurations, and finally the users experience the technology and comply with the policy. The opposite approach of this is the bottom-up approach, and the IT staff makes a security decision directly without input from senior management. And the bottom-up approach is rarely used in organization and is considered problematic in the IT industry because sometimes people don't really follow, and you kind of end up having lack of uniform standards. Security management is part of the operations and is the responsibility of the upper management, not the IT staff or IT administration. It's an important point here. The team or department responsible for security within an organization should be autonomous so that they are not influenced by other factors. InfoSec team should be led by a CISO who must report directly to senior management so that they have the independence and the authority to implement information security initiatives. The term CSO, Chief Security Officer, is sometimes used as an alternate form of CISO, but in many organizations, CSO is actually a sub-position under the CISO, and it focuses on physical security. Another potential term for CISO is Information Security Officer, but it is also used oftentimes as a sub-position under the Chief Information Security Officer. So part of security management planning includes defining security roles, prescribing how security will be managed, who will be responsible for security, and how security will be tested for effectiveness. Developing security policies, performing risk analysis, and requiring security education of employees. These efforts are guided through the development of the management plans. So this sentence here is a pretty comprehensive sentence and covers a wide range of activities needed in an organization. The best security plan is useless without one key factor, which is approval from the senior management. So you must get the support of senior management. It is the responsibility of the policy development team to educate senior management sufficiently, because senior management has typically a lot on its plate, and we must educate the members of the senior management team to fully understand what it is we are asking and what the implications are for the organization. Developing and implementing a security policy is evidence of senior management's due care and due diligence. Managers can be held liable for negligence and accountable for both asset and financial losses. Another important principle to note. So here's a picture that shows how different elements fit together. You know, you have a strategic plan which goes for a long term, usually 5 years. Then you have tactical plans covering the duration of each year where you're implementing the strategies outlined in the strategic plans. Then you have operational plans, which are short-term plans underneath the tactical plans to actually implement those strategies that are defined in the tactical plans. And then there are definitions of these terms. So, strategic plan is something that explains the security function and aligns it to the goals, missions, and objectives of the organization. And useful for about 5 years, we talked about this, and long-term goals of the organizations are covered in it. I think we talked about tactical plan. This includes like project plans, acquisition plans, hiring plans, budget plans, maintenance plans, support plans, system development plans, etc. Operational plans, example might include training plans, system deployment plans, and product design plans. One thing to note is that security is a continuous process. It's not a once and done approach. We have to continuously work to improve the security and ensure that the data assets of an organization are adequately protected. And the job of security process is never complete. It's something that continues to evolve. New threats emerge, new data types emerge, new technologies emerge, new attitudes in people emerge. And we have to adjust accordingly to make sure the data are protected. Security plans should focus on specific and achievable objectives and anticipate change in potential problems and serve as the basis of decision making for the entire organization. Then security documentation should be concrete, well-defined, and clearly stated. For security plan to be effective, it must be developed, maintained, and used. It's important that it is used. The best plans are useless if they're not used. In addition to the planning, there are organizational processes. So security governance needs to address every aspect of an organization. You have acquisitions, divestitures, governance committees, and increased security is often essential to reduce the likelihood of loss during such a period of transformation. You connect two IT systems, and you have to ensure that the security governance can address the protection of data during that phase. During a divestiture or employee departure, assets need to be sanitized to prevent data leaks. Storage media should be removed and destroyed, and employees released from duty need to be debriefed of their responsibility to continue to protect the information. In the information age, information is everything, and we must take steps to protect it. Two additional examples of organizational processes are change control and data classification. Very important topics, and we'll cover those in the next slides. So change and control management. The goal of change management is to ensure that any change does not lead to or reduce or compromise security. So change management is also responsible for making it possible to roll back any changes to a previous secure state. Its primary purpose is to make all changes subject to detailed documentation and auditing, and thus able to be reviewed and scrutinized by management. So I just read these sentences here because it's important to get the exact wording and language right and understand the nuances of those terms. A change control process has several goals. You have to implement changes in monitored, orderly, and controlled fashion. A formalized testing process to verify that the change did occur correctly and the results are as expected. All changes should be reversible. You should be able to go back, roll back, go to the previous state when things are good in case the change does not happen the way we expect it to happen. Users are informed of change before they occur to prevent loss of productivity, and this is an important element. The effects of changes are systematically analyzed to determine whether security or business processes are negatively affected. Negative impact of changes on capabilities, functionality, and performance is minimized, and changes are reviewed by a CAB or change advisory board. That's part of the governance processes to ensure that the board is able to evaluate all aspects of changes to protect the organization. One example of a change process is a parallel run, which is a type of new system deployment testing where the new system and the old systems are run in parallel. Like n and n plus 1 configurations are run in parallel. Each major or significant user process is performed on each system simultaneously to ensure that the new system supports all the required functionality that the old system supported, and this is a safe way of, basically deploying the change. Data classification, an extremely important topic, and it is a primary means by which data is protected based on its needs for secrecy, sensitivity, and confidentiality. The following are the benefits of data classification. It is a demonstration of the commitment that an organization has to protect valuable resources and assets. It helps in identifying those assets that are more critical or more valuable. So we talked about the limited resources of an organization, so therefore we devote more resources to protecting more sensitive data as opposed to spreading our resources thin by applying them to all data equally. It lends to credence to one selection of protection mechanism. It is often required for regulatory compliance or legal restrictions. It helps to define access levels, types of authorized users, and parameters for declassification and or destruction of resources that are no longer valuable. And it also helps with the data lifecycle management, right? Which in part is the storage length, and that is often called retention, usage, and destruction of data. So there are criteria that are employed in data classification, and they vary from an organization and based on the needs of the organization. But there are certain generalized principles that you can obtain from the common or standardized data classification system. So usefulness or data timeliness of the data value or cost of the data maturity or age of the data, lifetime of the data or when it expires associated with personnel, data disclosure damage assessment, that is how the disclosure of the data would affect the organization, data modification damage assessment, if somebody modifies the data, how would it affect the organization, what is the national security implications of data. I mean, extremely critical area right now, the SCADA system, for example. Authorized access to data, that is who has access to data, restrictions from data, the data, that is who is restricted from data, maintaining and monitoring of the data, storage of the data, and using whatever criteria is appropriate for the organization is evaluated and an appropriate data classification label is assigned. So that helps you, look at your data in a holistic manner. Implementation of the data classification scheme, you must perform 7 steps. Identify the custodian and define their responsibility. Who are the data custodians in your organization? Specify the evaluation criteria of how the information will be classified and labeled. The more people understand it, the better it is. Classify and label each resources. The data owner is the one who conducts this step, but a supervisor should review it. Document any exceptions to that classification policy that are discovered and integrate them into an evaluation criteria. It's an evolving process. Select the security control that will be applied to each classification level to provide the necessary level of protection. Specify the procedures for declassifying resources and the procedure for transferring custody of a resource to an external entity. We have a lot of outsourcing, for example. Create an enterprise-wide awareness program to instruct all personnel about the classification system. Again, the more people know, the better it is for the organization, and this helps achieve alignment and instills the value of data classification among the user base of the information systems. Declassification is often overlooked when designing a classification system and documenting the user procedure, but it is required once an asset no longer warrants the needs. Why protect an asset unnecessarily and devote resources when you don't need to? Two common data classification schemes that we can talk about are the government and military classification, and then we have commercial business or private sector classification. And again, here we have them listed. Basically, the needs are the same, but implementation might be different based on the specific operational needs of an organization. So government and military classification goes from top secret to unclassified. And top secret is the highest level of classification. Secret is used for data of a restricted nature. Confidential is used for data of a sensitive, proprietary, or high-value nature. Sensitive but unclassified is used for data that is internal use or for an office use only. Unclassified is used for data that is neither sensitive nor classified. And old saying goes that loose lips sink ships. So therefore the government and the military establishments are very serious about protecting their data. In a commercial or private sector classification level, again, you have confidential, which is the highest level of classifications. Private is used for data that is private for personal nature, like the date of birth, social security numbers, etc., and intended for internal use only. Sensitive is used for data that is more classified than public data. And public often is the lowest level of classification. Its disclosure does not have a serious negative impact on the organization, but I still want to point out that even public data needs to have some level of protection applied to it. Data classification or categorization, the element of ownership. Ownership of objects outside formal IT structures is often not as obvious. A company document can define owners of the facility, business tasks, processes, and so on. And a security role is the part of an individual is the part an individual plays in the overall scheme of security implementation and administration within an organization. So let's look at the 6 roles that will appear when you are trying to implement the ownership. Senior manager, the organizational owner, is assigned the person who is ultimately responsible for security managed by an organization. For example, your CFO might be the senior manager who's accountable for protecting the financial data of an organization. Security professionals, or officers or computer incident response team, CERT, role is assigned to a trained and experienced network systems and security engineer who's responsible for following the directives of the senior management in protecting the data. Data owner, his role is assigned to the person who's responsible for classifying information for placement and protection within this security role. Data custodian is assigned to the user who's responsible for the tasks of implementing the prescribed protection defined by the security policy and senior management. User or operator role is assigned to any person who has access to the secure system. These could be your employees, these could be contractors, guests, partners, and consultants who are coming in and accessing the data. Auditor is responsible for reviewing and verifying that the security policy is properly implemented and the derived security solutions are adequate, so that there's no material weakness in the controls you have implemented. Even the best controls need to be monitored to make sure they're functioning in protecting the data. All of these roles serve an important function within the secure environment. And it helps to know these roles so you can identify who's responsible within the hierarchical management structure of an organization. Let's talk about security control frameworks. Let's talk about COBIT first, and then we'll come back to the other one. So COBIT is a really fantastic standard. I really like it. It's basically objective is crafting a security stance for an organization, which often involves a significant amount of planning to develop a solid security policy. And the security control framework from COBIT, which is the Control Objectives for Information and Related Technology, COBIT, is one of the most widely used frameworks, and it is a documented set of best IT security practices crafted by this organization, ISACA, which stands for the Information Systems Audit and Control Association. It prescribes goals and requirements for security controls and encourages the mapping of IT security ideals to business objectives. There are 5 principles of COBIT 5. Number 1, meeting stakeholder needs. Number 2, covering the enterprise end to end. Number 3, applying a single integrated framework. Number 4, enabling a holistic approach. Number 5, separating governance from management. COBIT is used not only to plan the IT security of an organization, but also as a guideline for auditors. It's widely used and recognized. You can visit this website, isaca.org, to learn more. Let's go back to other frameworks. We have several other frameworks. Not all of them are listed here. The Open Source Security Testing Methodology Manual, OSS-TMM. You can learn more about it by visiting this link. ISO standards, the 27000 series, I really like those. Specifically ISO IEC 27002 is an international standard that can be the basis of implementing organizational security and related management practices. Information Technology Infrastructure, or ITIL, is initially crafted by the British government. ITIL is a set of recommendation best practices for core IT security and operational processes, and is often used as a starting point for crafting a customized IT security solution. ITIL principles are very good. Oftentimes, they cover a wide aspect, and we should be familiar with those. Now let's talk about due care and due diligence. Why is planning to plan security so important? One reason is the requirement for due care and due diligence. Due care is using reasonable care to protect the interest of an organization. Due diligence, on the other hand, is practicing the activities that maintain the due care effort. For example, due care is developing a formalized security structure containing a security policy, standard, baselines, guidelines, and procedures. Due diligence is the continued application of the security structure onto the IT infrastructure of an organization. Operational security is the ongoing maintenance of continued due care and due diligence by all responsible parties within that organization. In today's business environment, prudence is mandatory. Showing due care and due diligence is often the only way to disprove negligence in an occurrence of loss. Senior management must show due care and due diligence to reduce their culpability and liability when a loss occurs. So, this is an important principle that we must do our part. We must practice due care and implement due diligence in protecting data of an organization. So when there's a loss, there could be a legal claim against the company. At least you can show that due care and due diligence was implemented to protect the data. If there was no negligence, it may not have been the most effective solution, or there may have been a tiny loophole that somebody was able to, basically take advantage of. But at the end of the day, we must at least do our part in protecting the data. So that concludes our video for the second topic on Domain 1. We want to thank you for watching. Here's my email, and then please consider supporting us on Patreon. Making these videos takes resources and time, and as well as investment of funds. So your support will be greatly appreciated. And please subscribe and like if you like the content, and leave comments. Let's make this interactive. And thank you, everyone. See you in the next video. Again, this is Dr. Fezzi.